a super intense gradient pink blushy look with a bright under eye. It's been all over your feed for a while thanks to the incredible artists that created these looks, so I'm going to show you how I like to achieve it on myself. First, I put my foundation on, no concealer yet. I'm wearing the NARS Pure Radiant Tinted Moisturizer in the shade Mykonos. I'm going to put a bit of bronzer on too. This one is the Dior Contour Stick in the shade 02 Tan. I prefer a warmer shade on my skin tone, and this has been one of my favorites lately. I prefer to put this down before I go in with my blush, just so I don't end up disrupting any of the gradient that I create. I know technically it's against the rules to use a warm shade for your contour, but I just find it looks better on me. I've tried so many cool tone products and it just makes me look muddy. I'm not necessarily trying to add shadows or change the shape of my face. I just want there to be dimension, and this does a good enough job. And I just find it more flattering on my skin tone. First, I'm going to go in with creams and liquids, and the first blush I'm going to use is going to be the palest pink. This one is the Huda Beauty blush filter in the shade Cotton Candy. I don't love the applicator, but I love this color. Super important to make sure you're doing this before your concealer. I'm also keeping that pretty high on my cheek area because I'm just gonna go in with the same brush I used before and blend that right into my under eye area. I like to use the same brush that I use to put down my foundation and my contour because I feel like it just really helps to marry everything together. Next, I'm going to go in with a deeper pink. This one is Rare Beauty in the shade Happy. Placement here is super important to make sure you get that gradient. So with this one, I'm just going to put one tiny little dot there and one here. And when I'm blending it out, I'm just going to try to keep the blush as close to that area as possible by tapping the brush around there. See how that starts to build that intensity there? After the cream and liquid blush is blended out, now it's time for concealer. This one is Hourglass Vanish Airbrush Concealer in the shade Beach. Just gonna put a little bit here, a little bit here. I like to use a smaller synthetic fluffy eyeshadow blending brush for my concealer and just tap it to blend it out. Slowly go up towards the lash line, but not too far up. At the edge here, I will just feather it into the blush. I take the same brush that I used to blend out the blush and tap that edge there. I'm going to use a lighter concealer shade. This one is Huda Beauty in the shade Meringue 2.1N. And this one, I'm going to really keep it precise here. Here. You don't have to go this light. A couple shades lighter than the concealer you put on first is usually good enough. I'm going to use the same brush I used to blend out the first concealer. Really going to be precise here and just tap it in. I don't want to move it too much because I really want to keep the placement where it is. See how that's really concentrated right there? The lightest area is there, and then you have this whole gradient. That's exactly what I want. Just tap, don't move it too much. By tapping it in the same spot, you're really diffusing the edges, but you're keeping your placement. It's better to put down a tiny bit, and if you find you need more, then go in with more later. But if you add too much right away, it's hard to come back from that. Now it's time for setting powder. I have two options here. Both are from Huda Beauty. I have the Cherry Blossom one and Ube. Both of these are really good. I find that Ube is a lot more intense and really super blushy. I'm going to use Cherry Blossom to lightly set my under eyes first. Before setting your under eye, make sure you don't have any creasing going on. Grab some powder on my puff. I always use a puff for my under eyes and tap it out to make sure you don't have too much on the puff. Then just press. I'm only using this shade in my under eye area, and then I'm lightly going over the edge of the blush there. Under eyes are set, so now I'm just going to set the rest of my face. This is the Charlotte Tilbury powder in the shade 2. I like to use a fluffy brush, and I just lightly tap that over the rest of my face. I also go over my brows a little bit with setting powder because I don't like how shiny brows look, so this just helps take it down a little bit. Now it's time for powder blushes. First, I'm going to go in with this pink. It's a light pink, but it still has a good amount of vibrancy to it. I always use a fluffy brush for blush because it really helps to make sure you get a diffused edge, and it helps with blending. This one is from the Morphe and Ariel collab. It is A22. Always tap it to make sure you don't have too much on your brush, just along the cheekbone. I don't go into the under eye area. Same here. Using circular motions will help with blending. If I want a little bit more intensity, I'll just go in an even smaller area. We're starting to get the buildup of color. And then if you want even more, you can go in with an even more intense, deeper pink. This one is Kosas in the shade Butterflies. I'm going to use the same brush. And this one, I'm really going to just concentrate right around here. See how it just makes that pink more intense? At this stage is where I like to add this if I do want to intensify it even more, which I'm going to do just to show you, but I'm only going to take a little bit on my puff always tap it out. I don't necessarily like setting my under eyes with this powder because it gives a much more intense look. I prefer to just use this at the end for extra brightening and just brush away the edges with the same brush that I've been using for all my blushes. I find that this powder is really nice for extra intensity when you're doing a heavy blush look like this, but if you're just setting your under eyes and you're wearing a regular amount of blush, I really recommend just using the regular powder that you use in your under eyes. And we're done. This is how I like to achieve a gradient, super blushy, bright under eye type of look. I also use a similar type of technique when I do this look on clients. I just adjust the colors I use based on their skin tone. I used 5 products to achieve this look, but honestly, you don't really need to. The main thing is the technique, working in layers and the placement of your products. If you want a gradient look, you have to make sure that you keep your placement where you put it. You have to have a point that is lighter and a point that is more intense. For me, the lightest part is here. The most intense part is going to be here, and you have to be intentional about your placement and careful when you're blending. If you only have one cream blush, when you're done setting your face, go over your blush again with your cream blush on a brush, and that's really going to build up the intensity. If you only have one powder blush, work in layers, build up your intensity, and be intentional about your placement. Or you can just be extra like me. Honestly, sometimes it's pretty fun to see how many blushes I end up using.